From Perth, Australia, and broadcasting around the world, you're listening to The O Show with your host, Oren McCory. The O Show is a no-nonsense podcast bringing you the best advice on training, mindset, and nutrition to supercharge your efforts in the gym, the kitchen, and most importantly, in your head. Don't forget to share this episode on your social media. Now, let's get to it.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, guys, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to today's episode of The O Show. And I am very privileged. Let me start that again. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, guys. Welcome to today's episode of The O Show. And today I'm very privileged to have on Leaman, who is from the Muscle Nerds, who are an education company based in Queensland, Australia. Luke's worked with some of the top names in the industry, and he continues to educate the top guys in the industry. So he's a great guy to have on the podcast. We're not going to go deep into his background. You can look him up on Instagram. You can find all his other podcasts for that. We're pretty much going to dive into the topic. But Luke, how are you today, man?
Man, I'm good. Surviving the COVID madness.
Yep, just about. Like, we're doing okay over here in Australia, right? The rest of the world, not so much, but here we're good.
Good being on an island and we can just shut everything down, not let anybody in the country.
Yeah, that's it. That's the benefits of it. But then the UK is an island too, and they're absolutely fucked as well. So
yeah,
that's
true.
I guess with Muscle Nerds and what you do, like I said, you teach a lot of coaches stuff, which is how we met. I think Ben Hurren in Belfast recommended you before we moved here. He's like, oh, when you're going over to Australia, check out the Muscle Nerds. I was like, who's that? So he came over. I think I went straight on one of your courses, which was the foundation course. And I've continued to follow you guys since. I've done the program design course, and you guys put out some great content. So in terms of teaching people on this call, whether they're trainers or Gen Pop or athletes, whoever they are listening, I wanted to talk about prepping to prep. And this is something that I first heard from you. And I know that my coach, Callum Raystrick, uses this as well, and always credits you guys for coming up with this term. So prepping to prep, like, what does that mean in general for somebody who hasn't heard of it, and why is it so important?
But one thing I want to say, like with like Callum and Luke and all those guys, it's great because at one point those were students of mine, and now they've kind of gone off into their certain sector of the industry, and they're doing great things over there. So it's really good. It's actually really satisfying and gratifying to me when people that have come through my programs then go off and create something in their specific niche, and they're just killing it, right? And doing things the way they're supposed to be done. So, you know, I come from an old school background. Like, I've been training, I'll be 43 next month, and I've been training since I was 8 years old. And not just training, like just going to the gym and pumping up the stuff out of Flex magazine, but, you know, competitive. So bodybuilding, physique, strongman, MMA, powerlifting, American football. Like, I've always trained with a purpose. Like, I don't just train, I don't just work out, I train. And I come from that old school where you worked until you were ready to do something. And it's a completely different mindset right now. Whereas, you know, it's gotten really trendy and in vogue to do a bikini show and a bodybuilding show. You know, back then we didn't have bikini and physique and all that. It was just bodybuilding. So it was like a weird taboo section of weirdos that wanted to get in bikinis and strut their stuff and be subjectively judged on stage. Yeah. So, you know, back then you would train for years and years before you ever got on stage. But now, because some of the categories are such a low barrier to entry, people can just train for 12 weeks and jump on stage, right? There's no, because the standards you need for certain classes aren't what they need to be for bodybuilding. It's more accessible to people to get on, and they really don't have to train for very long to do it, or that's kind of their mindset. And so, you know, what I found was that we were having to fix a lot of people that would go to coaches that would starve them 900 calorie diets for months and months and months, no carbs, no fat, all protein, tons of cardio, tons of training, not enough rest, not enough focusing on keeping the people healthy, right? Losing their periods, hair falling out, guys losing their libido, losing their erection, dropping testosterone, all this crazy shit that's going on. And it just seems that, they were taking people that weren't ready to actually get ready for a show and just throwing them into the fire. And their solution as well, if it's not working, we'll throw more drugs in it or more training, or we'll cut calories, or we'll do some wacky shit. And so I spent a good probably 8 years just continuously fixing people that were screwed up from doing shows, or, competing 6, 7, 8 times a year, which is absolutely insane. Back in the day, you would do 1, maybe 2 competitions a year, and you would have a long off season. People don't have an off season anymore. They're always in contest prep, so they're always trying to stay shredded, which isn't a good thing when you're trying to be that shredded. Like if you're trying to be stage ready all the time, because you got to look good for Instagram and photo shoots, and there's a lot of shit that I just don't agree with a lot of it anymore. And one of the biggest factors I saw with them was their health was just completely shot. So their endocrinology was shot. Their mental state was shot. Psychological state was shot. Their body was shot. And they're basically just fighting a physiological situation that does not want to progress. It just wants to get worse. And so, then you got to try to crawl people out of that stuff when they've dug a hole that's too deep for them to climb out of. And that stuff can take a long time to rectify. So when I started thinking about the prepping the prep concept, I thought about what I teach for athletic training. And it's a basic athletic model. You have an athlete that goes into their season. At the end of the season, they're beat up, and they go through a general physical preparation phase to get ready to start training specifically for the next season. And why aren't we doing that with bodybuilding? Why aren't we doing that with the general population? Most people are structurally so jacked up. Their orthopedic profile is jacked up. They're in pain. They don't sleep enough. They work too much. They're too stressed, and they're not in any shape to even begin getting ready for a show. So kind of my model when people came to me is I would do an assessment. Let's look at what their body fat percentage is. Let's look at what their structure looks like. Let's look at their pains and their niggles. And people would these girls were coming to me, and coaches would say, well, I can have you on stage in 12 weeks. And I'm looking at the girl going, dude, you're 34% body fat. Like this, I can put you on stage and you can get on stage this weekend. Like there's no prerequisite other than pay $100 entry fee and jump on stage. But if you're going to jump on stage, you need to jump on stage with the desire to win. It's called a competition. So you want to make sure you're prepared, and you don't want to rush things, because then you're just going to blow up after the show, and you're going to have to struggle to get it back off again. And so I just got tired of it. So I said, well, I'm just start teaching people how to get on the right foot before you even get ready to do a contest prep. Right? So you need to get healthy first. Once you're healthy, the body wants to respond in a more productive manner. And then you don't have to fight the body. You can cruise into a show. Right. And so that's kind of the framework of prepping to prep.
Awesome. And then in terms of people who come in, like you say, who have this low barrier of entry, they want to do a bikini show, or maybe men's physique, which again is meant to be quite easily attainable. It's like a beach model look. It's obviously going more towards bodybuilding now, but it's meant to be that, ripped guy at the beach look. People want to do these shows very quickly. So maybe in their first year of training or with a coach, they'll try to do a show. What would you recommend for somebody who's coming in fresh, maybe just starting weight training? How long would you wait before they even consider a prep?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on where you start out. So the way I look at building a championship physique, I think about it as a sculptor would a big statue that he's going to build, right? The first thing you have to do is you have to acquire a big piece of granite. Well, how do we do that? We got to go to a rock quarry, and we have to use dynamite, and we have to blow out a big ass piece of rock. Yeah. So that would be your foundational training, right? That's your bench, squat, deadlift. That's just get big, like get really big. If you're overly fat, get a little bit leaner first, because what we found is the more fat you put on, the less anabolically sensitive you are to putting on muscle. So there seems to be a threshold that when you get to a certain level of fatness, you are getting bigger, but it's not a very good trade-off between building muscle and losing fat. So we want to make sure that you haven't exceeded that. So we like to get people into a reasonable shape first, and then bulk over time, but only put on enough weight to where you're putting on more muscle than fat. So the first thing is just build a big ass frame, because you're not going to build a big frame doing dinky little exercises. So you need to do the big stuff. And you also need to make sure that you're orthopedically cleared to do this stuff. If you've got niggling knee pain and back pain, overpronation in the feet and things like that, you probably don't want to be doing a lot of heavy squatting and deadlifting on it until you rectify that stuff. So we might work around a lot of these issues by doing rack pulls or pulls from blocks and maybe heels elevated squats, and work around that while we fix what's wrong with your structure. And then when the muscles are all playing nicely together, you grow very easily without pain. You sleep better because you don't have any pain. You recover better because you have less inflammation, like joint inflammation and systemic inflammation. There's a lot of factors that you really need to get straight and iron a lot of wrinkles out before you go. People who are younger tend to be a little bit more tolerant. They can get away with a lot more, right? But the older you get, and we see a lot of people that first timers that are in their 30s, they're wanting to jump on stage, and they have 30 something years of dysfunction that they really need to focus on first. Because if the body's not in a good position, you can't work the muscles the way they're supposed to. And you're at more risk of getting injured, and you can't display it on stage. People seem to think that it's all about the lifting and the eating and all that, but you at some point you have to get on stage and you have to express that art of all the hard work you've done. So if you've got massively internally rotated shoulders, how are you going to get in the back double biceps correctly without having to modify that? It's not going to look good on stage. And you also can't hold that pose without getting fatigued. And that never looks good when it's hot and you're depleted and you're shaking like you've got Parkinson's trying to hold a double biceps, right? So we look at things like that. Build the frame first, get everything in alignment as good as you can to acceptable levels. Then the next stage is now I have to take a big chisel and I have to start chiseling away at big pieces, knock big pieces off. And then towards the later stages, we get a smaller chisel and we start fine detail work. Yeah. So, I would say if you want to really do well and place at your first show, and let's say if you're genetically blessed, this can be very quick. If you're not, and you've got some issues some glaring weaknesses, it could take years before you get to that stage. So don't rush it. Like, it's supposed to be a process. It's supposed to be self-fulfillment. So you want to take your time to get there.
Yeah, 100%. And then whenever you do one of these phases where we're building the calories up, we're making sure all the health markers are in line. Is there anything specifically in terms of calories you work off? Obviously, for a female, for example, somebody might hit their threshold where they're gaining too much fat at 1,600 calories. Another girl might be 2,000 or 2,200. But do you work off anything like the calories per kilo model or anything like that as an indication? Or how would you determine when's maybe a good time to start a diet then?
Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll use, it depends on what we have access to. Like if it's online training, I don't have access to a lot of, I can't take your body fat through email, right? So we have to create situations that they can use this. We use a lot of circumference measures. Yep. I find that the Navy body fat test is fairly good. There's no body fat method that's completely accurate, right? None of them. Even DEXA can be 3 to 5% plus or minus. So, if you have access to a DEXA, that's a good place to start. We can get a DEXA, we can look at your pictures, and we can make a ballpark assessment of where you're at. If you don't have access to that stuff, then we can do circumference measures, use Navy body fat. At least it's something to then measure itself against itself. I typically use ultrasound. So I've got an ultrasound device that's fairly accurate. Usually when I do DEXA, it's within like 2% of the DEXA. So that gives me a pretty good ballpark. We have access to a DEXA as well. So what we'll tend to try to do is try to get guys at least somewhere around like 14, 15% and not let them get above 20%. So, at 15%, you should see the linea alba and you should start to see some abs coming in. When their abs start to go away, then we might do a mini cut and drop that down. And the same thing with girls. We try to keep the girls under, say, 25, 27%. Get them close to 20 and then work them back up, mini cut, get them back to 20. And what's nice is if you start in a really good position, like let's say you're 20 to 22%, and then you start, you go on your long kind of slow bulk up, it gets a lot easier when you start cutting because inevitably you can get your calories a lot higher. So you don't have to cut them down that much. And once you come off of that kind of 6 to 8 week bulking phase, 12-week bulking phase, once you make the switch, it tends to drop off really fast. And so you don't really have to diet that much to get some of it off. and then you can keep starting. So you go like 12 weeks of bulking, and you might do 4 or 5, maybe 6 weeks tops of a mini cut, sometimes even less time than that. And you just wash, rinse, and repeat that over time, and focus not on bulking and cutting, but more on recomping.
Yeah.
Right. So, I would say, like, for guys, I like guys gaining maybe, like, this is going to sound so low, but like maybe 125, 150 grams on average a week.
Yep.
I look at something around there, and girls might be around maybe like, about 60 or 70% of that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And how would that change, for example, if you're working with an athlete who's assisted for a bodybuilding show versus somebody who's a natural meal? Would that be the same rate, or do you look at slightly different numbers?
No, I would probably be comfortable doubling that if they're assisted, but they got to be realistic. Like, steroids are great. Like, I love steroids. I mean, I do. They're fantastic performance enhancing drugs. They're not for everyone. It's a personal choice. I'm adamant that I wish all older guys would look at TRT, but it's almost impossible to get in Australia unless you go down to the Gold Coast, and then those doctors want to give you a neck tattoo and 5 grams of gear a week. But luckily they're starting to ease those restrictions up, because if you've been a lifelong athlete too, like me, you're probably going, if you've pushed your body hard, you're probably going to need that towards the end of your 30s and early 40s. It's just inevitable, because high level competition screws things up, right? But if they're on gear, depends on what they're taking. So if you're taking 600 milligrams of testosterone, maybe something like 6 milligrams per kilo of body mass in testosterone, you're going to probably put on 7 to 10 kilos easy over the course of a few months. But you don't want to try to push it. You want to stick with a more non-assisted approach and take it easy, because the steroids don't burn fat, right? So if you get on the gear and you start pushing the food too much, and thinking that the gears makes you Superman and you can train like ungodly amounts of volume, inevitably that's going to lead to a lot of inflammation. You're going to have a lot of water weight gain. And then when you go back to your TRT, when you're bridging to your next cycle, you're going to lose a ton of that. And there's really no point to me. I just want steady progress. I want to make sure that they're not pushing themselves to a point where they're going to get an overuse injury from something and thinking that the steroids make you godlike, because they don't. They make you like a demigod, like a god came down and had sex with your mom, and now you're half god and half mortal. You're not Zeus, right? So, but they are magic. If you get on something like, D-bol or Anadrol, you're going to have a lot of water gain. So it's not unusual to do like a D-bol test cycle for somebody to put 15 kilos on, like within a span of 4 to 6 weeks. But just understand that a lot of that's going to go away when you get off. Yeah. And you're hoping that you're left with like 10 kilos after you do that.
Yeah. So you're probably talking, if somebody's looking to keep an eye on these numbers, for an average unassisted male, you're talking about 100 to 150 grams added per week. Female, about maybe 50 to 70 grams per week, and assisted male, probably 200 to 300 maybe per.
Yeah, something like that. And yeah, because there's no point in putting weight on that you're just going to have to pull off anyway. So what you're trying to do, same thing with dieting. When you're dieting, you're probably going to lose some lean tissue unless you're enhanced. The slower you go, the less likely that you're going to lose muscle tissue if you're just patient. So if you're losing 400 or 500 grams of fat a week, you're probably not going to lose any muscle mass, or very, very little, as long as your volume isn't completely insane. And just understand that when you're cutting, the weights are there to stimulate muscle protein synthesis so you don't lose muscle. It's not there to lose weight. And you don't want to starve yourself, because then the body's, if it becomes catabolic, it's going to just rip away tissue that you just spent 12 months putting on, and then you allowed yourself to get too fat during your off season, and now you freak out because summer's coming and you want to go to the beach and you want to look good, and now you pull 1,000 calories out of your meal plan, and then you end up over, let's say 15 months, you're left with like 2 kilos of muscle gain. Yeah. Which you could easily have quadrupled that if you had just gone slowly.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. And then in terms of, I'm going to throw a scenario at you, like an athlete who likes to tick the boxes, will do a lot of data tracking for you. What do you like to what's the data measures that you'd like to keep a track on during their off season before they would start a prep, like blood pressure, blood glucose? What would you personally do?
Yeah, blood pressure is probably the big one, because we have to think about this too. Like, despite what the magazines and the Instagram trainers will tell you, training for hypertrophy is not normal or natural to a human body. We're not designed. We can do it. We can squat heavy. We're not really designed to do that. So if you're going to do something artificial because you want to get bigger and stronger, it doesn't make you a bad person to want that. Just understand there's always a side effect and a consequence. Yeah. Because if you're using exogenous loading to get bigger and progressive resistance to get bigger, well past what's considered natural. What I mean by that is, even somebody who's not assisted, if you're squatting repeatedly to get huge legs and bench pressing, there's nothing evolutionarily productive about that. Like, we're built to climb, run, sprint, jump, that type of thing. So when you're doing squats, you are actually not really a natural lifter because you're doing very artificial and natural things to our bodies. So that's going to carry for hypertrophy a lot of residual inflammation. That's one of the mechanisms by which we grow anyway. So if you're focusing on excessive amounts of food, that's going to cause, pushing you more towards metabolic resistance, anabolic resistance, insulin resistance, leptin resistance, high levels of inflammation. You got to be able to balance that out. Okay. So when you look at the two sides of the metabolism with anabolism and catabolism, there's a fine, delicate balance that the body wants to keep. Now, in order to grow, you are going to have to push it to an altered ratio, right? But the longer you do that and the more excessive you do that, the body's just going to respond by trying to adapt around that. And sometimes the body maladapts. If you go into cutting and you're eating 1,000 calories a day and training 21 hours a week, it's the same type of thing. The body is naturally going to adjust everything towards what you're allowing it to have and trying to do damage control. So, what we like to think about a lot is think about the Goldilocks principle. You don't want it too hot or too cold. You want it just right. So you've got this narrow range that you can stay in. And once you deviate outside of that, if you want to deviate outside, that's cool. But there needs to be a finite beginning and end to what you're doing. So, like, for instance, if I'm giving someone a 40% deficit, which I very rarely do, but if they're stuck, I might give them a 40% deficit for 2 weeks, and then we come off to a diet break. So we try to break a plateau and then try to get back to that homeostatic level. Because if you continue to push the calories that low very long and try to train, your performance goes down, you start losing muscle tissue, you start holding on to weight because you're flooding your body with water, you don't sleep well, you lose your appetite, or you start binging. There's a lot of repercussions because the body is going to do anything it can do to counteract the dumb shit you're doing to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one thing about prepping to prep that sticks in my head from that lecture that I went to in 2018 is you were talking about how some people come in for an average trainer and they're just not in a position to even start with weight training, where they need to focus on a lot of stretching, a lot of cardio, and a lot of just getting all the physiology back into line. So how would you identify, if there's trainers listening to this, when somebody comes in for a PT session or comes on board as an online coach, how would you maybe identify how much weight training versus cardio to give them to get them in a healthy place to start with?
Yeah. So, and the thing is, it's not that you don't want to weight train. It's just you might have to modulate your views on how weight training should be done, right? So, somebody comes in and they've got massive anterior pelvic rotation, massive internal rotation of the legs. They've got massive pronation of the feet. Maybe they've got hyperlordosis. Maybe they got forward head posture, internal rotation of the humerus. And now you think about all the things that we would normally do in the gym, like squatting and overhead pressing and things like that. Well, their structure isn't really in a great position to do these things. So when they try to do them, they're going to modify this hip shifting, too much hinging, lifting with the lower back, and they're going to get injured. And injury is not really great for performance in long-term goals, especially with bodybuilding. So we start thinking about, okay, where is this function in their structure? How do we fix that? So instead of having them bilateral squat, we might think, well, maybe they need to do some PNF and static stretching to relieve tension on the muscles that are too grabby. And then we might need to go through some weighted mobility stuff like split squats, Bulgarian split squats. We might need to do, I'm a big proponent into doing a lot of length and range of motion lifting initially, because that's the place people typically avoid. And so we start stretching muscles that might be a little bit over tonic, but you can't just stretch because that destabilizes everything. I have to do a weighted mobility movement with that to set the nervous system and create more stability and strength in that new range of motion. And then we have to work all the antagonistic muscles and muscles that then counteract and fixate and stabilize those areas too. So like if we look at most of the bros in the gym, you know, Monday, Wednesday, Friday is international bench days, and they're just doing bench and curl. But they're inevitably going to cause a lot of internal rotation. Their scapula is going to lose stability, and it's going to start to anteriorly tilt and possibly transversely rotate and get excessive protraction in a standing resting position, which, you know, even at that point, they're trying to work their chest. And if their shoulders are forward, they're basically just building really good anterior delts and causing more dysfunction. If we can fix all that stuff by reducing the length tension discrepancies, now they get in a position where they actually can feel the muscle work and everything gets into balance, which immediately looks better, removes the issue of moving them towards an injury state, and they end up with a better product. So we normally will spend, if somebody comes in, and some of the metrics we do is like blood pressure. If they have really high blood pressure, not uncommon for a lot of people, really high resting heart rate, they don't sleep well, they've got busted guts, they're always like keyed up and they can't calm down. What we're going to do is stick to more higher rep stuff, giant set stuff, working more the type 1 and type 2A fibers in a lengthened state and getting them more mobile under load. And then when everything starts feeling better and they don't have pain, then we start working into the squats, and then we start moving into more hypertrophy, functional hypertrophy ranges. Yeah. So that's kind of the model we do for the resistance training. If their blood pressure is high, their HRV is low, if their heart rate's high, then the easiest way to fix that is just get really aerobically fit. So we might do like a cardiac output test where we have them do 12 minutes as hard as they can on a piece of equipment, and we can calculate a rough estimate of what their VO2 max is. And it's not perfect, but it gives you something to then weigh and measure, and not needing $100,000 worth of equipment to do it. And then you can put them through, say, 8 to 12 weeks of dedicated aerobic training. We can see that they're getting their heart rate's going down, their blood pressure's going down, HRV's going up. We retest that. We see their VO2 maxes jump 15 or 20 beats. They feel better. They're able to eat more food because they're oxidizing better, and their work capacity is better, so they can train harder in the gym and they can recover harder when they're not in the gym. Mm-hmm. So we'll typically go on for most people, we'll front load the aerobics. And the reason we do that is I'm not trying to be different than what everybody else does. I'm just trying to do something that makes more sense. You know, most people will put the aerobic work at the end of the contest prep because they're chasing calories. That never works out that great because you're just creating a more and more of a deficit. So the metabolism keeps maladapting in order to match calories in and calories out. And then people get to a point where they're eating fuck all, and they're training tons, and now they're not recovering, and they just look worse and worse and worse. So if we put the aerobic stuff and the conditioning at the front and just get that, because that's the boring shit, get that out of the way, get in better shape, it actually makes all the phases after that way better. You can recover better, you can train harder, you don't need as much rest between workouts, you're sleeping better. You know, aerobic work tends to be very analgesic to the body. So if you're constantly taking naproxen and aspirin and Tylenol or Panadol and things like that, try a little bit of light aerobics and see if that creates a lower stress and inflammatory state. You'll actually feel way better.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of leads into another topic which you're known for, is the whole cardio for meatheads thing. Because a lot of bodybuilders, and we were speaking with this on a podcast I recorded just yesterday, a lot of bodybuilders will shy away from it. But in reality, the ones who are the best in the world will just, as my guest said yesterday, just put their hood up and fucking get on with it. So why, you've obviously listed everything, but why specifically should bodybuilders like year round include cardio?
Well, I think, like I said, it makes everything better. And it's not that you need to become a marathon runner, but you need to have a respectable level of aerobic conditioning. It's gotten really trendy, in the last 10 years. Everybody's, well, fuck cardio. You don't need cardio to do a bodybuilding show. I absolutely agree. You don't. But I tell you what, it makes it a hell of a lot easier. And if you do it the way I'm talking about, do it early in prep and get it out of the way. If you stop doing the cardio, number one, there's only probably at a 2 to 3% drop each week when you totally remove it. But you have to get to that level first, and then you don't have to mess with it. Or you can do, a couple of really hard Tabata sets, 2 Tabata sets twice a week, and you can maintain a lot of that stuff. And then the rest of your energy can go just on lifting. Yeah. But people aren't doing it. And that's the problem. If we look at how bodybuilders did it in the past, they would do a lot of the cardio and it worked perfectly fine. Now people go, well, it doesn't work. It's always worked. And we've got bodybuilders having strokes, and we got bodybuilders having fucking kidney issues and cardiovascular disease and all this shit because they're avoiding that stuff. It's not just the drugs, it's avoiding staying in shape and glorifying anabolic pathways and not worrying about your cardiovascular health and your cellular health.
Yeah. And it transfers over to all other areas as well. Like you said, like when you're posing up there on stage, like sometimes the judges can really fucking work you. And if you can't hold it and you're shaking, like you said, somebody with Parkinson's, then that's not a good look. And you're sweating under the lights. It's just not a good look. Your time's going to run. Even in your performance in the sets, like if you're doing a set of 8 to 12 on a hack squat, you're going to be blown out of your arse by the end of it if you don't have any aerobic conditioning, versus if you do that little bit of cardio, that 8 to 12 gets that little bit easier. So then maybe you can handle more load. Maybe what's holding you back from putting more load on the hack squat is literally your cardio because you can't recover quick enough.
That's it. Like you're trying to do a 12 rep set and you're gassed and your lactate threshold is low and you're just struggling to get through this. That's not going to be great for growth. Like, again, you've got to keep, there's a continuum of this stuff, and you want to not go too far to one side or the other. You want to stay kind of in the middle of this stuff. And what's funny to me is that, I grew up powerlifting competitively, and I grew up at a stage where we didn't do any conditioning. We didn't do conditioning. There's a lot of stuff that powerlifters do now we would never do because we thought it wasn't practical or beneficial. And then we started finding out everybody's got 200 and something over 100 blood pressure, and they got fatigue and constant injuries. And then the powerlifters go, well, maybe we should do some conditioning. So they started pushing the prowler, pulling sleds. They started actually taking that stuff seriously, and it's evolved where they'll do it. Now, if a powerlifter whose main goal is to do a 1 rep max on a bench squat and deadlift, if they're saying that conditioning work is actually beneficial, why are the bodybuilders so resistant to doing that and thinking that that's going to ruin their gains? It just baffles my mind that powerlifters started doing the conditioning when the bodybuilders decided they didn't need to do it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then what about these coaches who say, oh, none of my guys do cardio, but they just give their clients step goals? What's your opinion on that?
If you've got a step goal, you're doing fucking cardio. You can't get more aerobic than doing 16,000 fucking steps a day. But the problem is, who's got the time for that? Number two, you're going to adapt to that very quickly. So in order to get any better adaptations, you have to do more steps, or you're going to have to walk faster. You could get so much more done if you would just do some submaximal aerobic work and pick it up a little bit. It would not impair your ability to gain muscle. We're not talking about getting on the treadmill and running as hard as you can for 12K. We're talking about, instead of just walk on an incline and walk a bit faster and get your heart rate to a sufficient level where it helps promote fat oxidation without impairing your ability to build muscle. And again, a secondary thing is it helps increase relaxation and parasympathetic state, which you're going to need to recover from your strength training workout. Mm-hmm. But then, people start talking about, oh, what about the crossover effect? And what about these studies? The crossover effect, as far as I can see, and my buddy Mike Nelson, he says the same thing. And a couple other people like Andy Galpan, some of these guys are saying it's probably like 1% that you're having to worry about, as long as you don't dedicate yourself to doing a triathlon while you're trying to build a lot of muscle. even getting on a treadmill and walking for 30 minutes at a fast clip and just breathing a little bit, that's probably not going to promote or demote any strength gains that you got during your workout. And if you're worried about that, do it before your workout and use that as part of your warm up.
Yeah.
But people really need to get it done.
Yeah. And then you were saying there about training at an appropriate level to support fat oxidation. So what would that level be if you're giving somebody a target, maybe with heart rate, to hit as part of their workout? If say if they're doing 30 minutes on the treadmill, what would you like them to aim for?
So it's generally accepted that right around about 65% VO2 max, up to about that point, you're primarily utilizing fat. Like you're using fat and carbs, but the ratio of fat is much higher than carbohydrate. Once you exceed that and start getting close to 70% VO2 max and higher, you progressively start oxidizing a higher ratio of carbohydrates to fat. Those can both be very valuable tools, even for bodybuilders. And I'll use that too. Like in a lot of cases, if I have someone like, all the fitness girls are all scared of carbs. We're trying to get them to understand that carbs aren't the problem. The problem is how your body's handling the carbs. We can easily fix that. And then we can start adding a lot more carbs so your muscles look nice and big, and you can put those carbohydrates to use when you're in the gym. So one of the things I'll do is when I'm transitioning somebody from doing the sub 65% intensity, I'll progress them to about 70% VO2 max, and I'll start adding carbs, because now they're putting those carbs to good use to do the cardio better. They're getting in better shape, and now they don't get scared of carbs anymore. And they realize I feel and look a lot better when I have a sufficient amount of carbs, and I can fuel my workouts better. Now, how do you measure VO2 max when you're on a machine? Unless you've got fancy ass equipment, then you're kind of screwed. So we have to be able to associate that with something that's easy to measure, which is heart rate max. So, if we start looking at, where does heart rate max and VO2 max line up? And the best numbers I see is that around 65% VO2 max is equal to about 70 to 73% heart rate max. So as long as you're working up to that, and maybe staying a little bit below that, that is still, it's still low intensity enough where you can nasal breathe, you can still hold a conversation, but you're burning a lot more calories, you're getting a lot more aerobic adaptations. So if you're sticking around that, so if you know what your maximum heart rate is, you do a 12-minute cardiac output test, get on an Aerodyne, or get on, if you're good, find a piece of equipment that you're really good at. If you're good at running outside, running on a treadmill, rower, skier, the Aerodyne, I usually use the Aerodyne because it's non-impact and it's pretty much accessible for everyone. It's just the one that sucks the most because you basically go hard for 30 seconds and it's 11 and a half minutes of struggle streak. But if you can push through that and you're wearing a heart rate monitor, you can see where your voluntary maximum heart rate is right now, and you can calculate your percentage off of that.
Okay.
And then what you do is when you get on the treadmill, let's say your maximum voluntary heart rate is 193, just make sure you stay below 135 and do that for an extended period of time. And you're sweet. That's all you need to do. So you can go walk outside at 90 beats per minute and burn very few calories and get very slow aerobic adaptations that then cap out at some point. Or you can just go to 130 beats per minute and get much more adaptation. And then when you get more fit, you're probably going to have to go a bit harder to keep your heart rate elevated. And then typically we see maximal heart rate keep climbing up to their genetic limit. And then you also see resting heart rate go down. If I can increase maximum voluntary heart rate and then decrease my resting heart rate, your VO2 is automatically going up, which means you're going to burn more calories when you're training.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. And clearly there's a lot that's going into this. It's a very complex equation in your head to get the desired result. That's why you're the go-to guy for fixing these people who come to you really fucked up, right? But for an average person, let's say most people listening to this podcast would be Gen Pop. Maybe some of them haven't been eating enough and they need to spend a bit of time building calories up and working on cardio and that. What would you think? I'll give you an example. Let's say a female who's been eating on average 1,400 calories per day, still wants to lose body fat, maybe has 10 kilos of fat to lose. What would be the first things you'd focus on to get them in a healthy enough place to then diet and pull more fat off?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would do is say, okay, you've been dieting a lot. Let's see how much net calories you're getting. So let's see, like you're eating 1,400. Let's now see what's your total daily energy expenditure including all of your exercise, and let's kind of figure out if you're even eating sufficient calories for your body right now. I would do things like take their body temperature. If they have low, say early afternoon temperature, if it's normal temperature is 36.8, give or take a little bit. If it's sitting, I see girls at like 35.2. I can tell you right now, if your body temperature has dropped 1 degree Celsius, your metabolism's on struggle street. So this would be a perfect time to say, well, let's take you back up to maintenance, maybe maintenance minus 10%. You're going to gain a little bit of weight because you've got more fecal matter, you're eating more carbs, you got more food, you have more sodium, so your weight's going to go up, but it's not fat. Right? You're going to have a lot more calories than that to actually put on fat. But if we can raise you up to that level and then reappropriate what you're doing with your excessive volume of training, which most of them are doing, we can go through and say, how high can we get you where your body weight's stable? And then we might push it up. Where can we get to where you actually start gaining a little bit of weight for a couple of weeks consistently? Now we know we've exceeded your maintenance. Now we can just pull 20% off of that. And now you're in a 20% deficit and we can start chipping back off. Yeah. And so what we'll do is we'll try to make a good, ballpark figure of what their lean body mass is. We'll use Catch McCardle to find out what their BMR is. We'll add 20% for neat and thermic effect. And then we'll add in an activity factor, or we'll add in, we'll calculate with metabolic equivalents all their activity. And we'll say, okay, you're probably somewhere around 2,100 to maintain your body weight. We're going to feed you somewhere around like 1,900 and see what happens. And we're going to use circumference measures so that even if you gain weight, you'll see that it's not fat. It's just your muscles are swelling up. You're getting better pumps at the gym. You're feeling better. You're training better. You're sleeping better. Your anxiety and stress has gone down. And then once we're stable, then we can reevaluate a long-term plan. And this time we're not going to take you back down to fuck all calories. We're going to feed you so you can train hard, and we're going to recomp slowly over time. Yeah. Right.
Okay. And in terms of that with building up calories, obviously that's a big mental hurdle with a lot of people, especially females when they've been eating low. It's because of they're scared of gaining weight. So for example, if you'd done that equation and she was eating 1,400 calories on average, and you worked out that she needed 2,200 based on her body weight, using whatever equation that you'd use as a coach, how would you approach that psychologically with the client in terms of framing it like of the benefits to them, so they don't just think, oh fuck, I'm going to get fat because Luke wants me to eat 1,900 calories or 2,000 calories?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, like that used to be a really hard thing to get them to understand, but now that more and more women are talking about how much food they're eating and getting gains, and girls are getting now, there's a lot of girls are kind of getting off the just fat loss bandwagon, and they're starting to actually focus on strength and performance and putting on muscle, right? So it's actually good because you've got a lot of examples of girls who have broken that cycle that you can then use as examples. So it's like, look, this girl, here's some of my clients, here's some other Instagram girls that have done the same thing. And so we'll have that talk with them. And then we say, look, I'm not a big reverse diet guy. I think that if you're reverse dieting, that's just delaying the inevitable. I'd rather go back to maintenance, less 10%. But psychologically, if you can't handle that, then we'll slowly every week or two add another 100 calories, and we'll just see how we go. And if we have to use that because of a psychological thing, then that's easy. And what we'll tend to do is pump their protein up first, because if we pump the protein up, we can leverage a little bit extra thermic effect of food. Very difficult to overeat protein. When they do pump their protein up, let's say they're eating, Gen Pop, it's not uncommon for them to be eating 60 grams of protein. In the fitness industry, that 110, 120, we'll say, well, here's the benefits of adding more protein, and then we'll pump it up. Let's try to pump it up to like 2.5 grams per kilo, or even higher. And you're guaranteed to not gain any weight pretty much, except for muscle weight. And then when we get them up there, then we can start slowly adding some more carbs. And then we can start bringing the protein down a little bit once they realize that calories aren't the villain here. And then we start giving some carbohydrates. They realize carbohydrates are awesome, they're delicious, and they can improve performance, and they're not the villain. And so we'll do it that way, because there is that psychological component. Most guys, you don't have to worry about that. Most guys, if they gain weight, they don't give a shit, because I think it's the way we view ourselves. So most guys, when they look in the mirror, they can be fat as shit. They can have a dicky do where their stomach hangs lower than their dick do. They haven't looked down and seen their balls in years, and they look in the mirror and they still think they look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Yeah. And then you got the girls who, no matter how lean they are and how skinny they are, they still think they're fat. And it's just a ridiculous psychological weird discrepancy between how guys view themselves versus girls. And so with the guys, it's very easy to usually take them to maintenance. And with the girls, you might have to use some reverse dieting, and that's okay. You know, if that's the tool we need to do to get you there, then that's totally fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, perfect, mate, perfect. And I think there's tons in here, mate, in terms of psychology, calories, cardio. So I think we've got enough here. I don't want to bombard people with more information. But if people like this, they like hearing the American accent. You've also got some incredibly funny names on your profile. Texan, yeah, Texan accent. Not just any American accent, right? The Texan accent. So if they enjoyed what you've presented here, they want to follow you, they want to see some incredible memes on your page. How can they find you? How can they find what you do with Muscle Nerds and anything else you want people to check out?
Well, if they like memes and they hate political correctness, then they can follow me on my personal one at Luke Leaman, Leaman on Instagram. If they want like fitness stuff and motivation, then go to Muscle Nerds _health. And then we're also on obviously Facebook, but no one uses Facebook anymore. And then if they want to inquire about anything, it's info@musclenerds.net. So, you know, we just put out I feel it's a really good, and we've had really good feedback on our online nutrition course. It's not expensive. There's over 8 hours of content and a forum for questions. I think that, you know, coaches should be looking at this to get like, realistically, here's how it should be done. And here's how you create a framework and a foundation of understanding how food works. And I think I've got a lot of coaches that have been getting their clients to buy it too, because it's done in a way that's practical, and it is sciencey, but it's watered down into bro speak. So even general population people can understand it. And it makes clients better clients, because all they need to do is watch this and they go, oh, now I understand why you're doing it like this. Yeah. Okay. And now they've got buy-in because they've had someone else explain all the science behind why we do it. And they go, okay, maybe I will add another 30 grams of protein. Okay, maybe I will start eating a bit more carbohydrate if that's going to help my workout. And just let us do the education so that your clients actually they'll be compliant about what you're doing with them. And then you don't have to keep explaining to people why you're doing the things that you're doing, right?
Yeah, perfect. So that's a big one, whether it's coach or gym pop or athlete. Like, if you want to know more about nutrition, check out that course, basically.
Yeah, and that's we wanted to make it where it was easily like, here's the science and here's how you apply it. So coaches got better, but we wanted to also make it accessible to Gen Pop, where they wouldn't watch it and be like, I don't know what the fuck this guy's talking about. They can watch and be like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Cool. Yeah. Like our program design that you're in now, that's some heavy lifting right there. That's a massive course.
But again, it's very beneficial. Same with the foundation seminar. When you guys get back to doing actual in-person seminars, all these courses are like tools in the toolbox, right? That you can then pull out and you can be like, oh, remember Luke said that one thing, or what's Luke's protocol for this situation? And you've got a million protocols for every situation, you know? So these are all valuable courses, guys. I encourage you to follow Muscle Nerds if you're a coach. If you're just looking to know more about what your coach is doing, that course sounds fantastic. I'm going to check it out myself after this, Luke. And yeah, I mean, I think this has been incredibly beneficial. We went in depth on a lot of stuff, and it gives people something to think about, whether they're Gen Pop starting off, whether they're a coach, or whether they're a client who wants to do a prep, or somebody who's quite serious about a prep, what they all need to consider along the way. So, mate, it's been perfect. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me. I want to say one last thing for if you are listening to this or watching this and you are considering doing a competition, if the first thing your coach says is, what drugs are you willing to take? Find another coach, right? Yeah. Because the guys who want you to jump on drugs first, they probably don't know how to write proper programs, and they're focusing on the last most important thing. Like, that's the last thing you want to focus on. You want to get all the other stuff in line. And then if you decide that performance enhancing drugs is something you want to try, then that should be the very last discussion, and it should start with like very low dose stuff, not kitchen sink. We got a client who went to a doctor, I think it was in South America, and he wanted to do TRT, and the doctor put him on immediately, like first cycle, 10 IUs of growth a day, 500 milligrams of test a week, which I'm fine with, but also 400 milligrams a deca. That's actually fine, but it's a bit much for a beginner cycle. And he put him on 100 milligrams of prop as well. So he was on he's immediately on like 1500 milligrams of gear, and he's never done a cycle before. Yeah. And 10 IUs of growth. That number one, 100 IUs of growth every 10 days. That's like $700 every 10. That's $2,100 a month in growth, and it's absolutely not needed unless you're a professional bodybuilder.
Yeah. So it's a good point, mate, to finish on. And this stuff is for the people who are more advanced, and it shouldn't be pushed on by any coach. It should be a conversation where when the client is ready to start doing something like that, they say, "Hey, coach, what do you think about adding something like this in? How would I go about that?" And then as a coach, you can educate them on the most effective way to do that, rather than say, "Here's what you're going to need. You're going to need this, 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 and this. Were you willing to take this?" And then like the rest is an afterthought. It should be the complete opposite, like you said.
Lowest effective dose. And when you've gotten enough out of that, then consider adding a little bit more. And then when that ceases, then I'll add a little bit more. You've got plenty of time to work your way up into a proper bro cycle, but most people don't actually need it. If you're training right, if you're training correctly, resting correctly, eating correctly, and you've got all your P's and Q's all done, it takes very little drugs to actually win a contest. Yeah, a tested contest. Don't take drugs and do a non-tested or a tested contest. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. There's people who do that, right? It's very common.
Drives me crazy.
Yeah. It's just not needed, in my opinion. It's if you're gonna do those shows, leave it to the people who aren't willing to take it, right? And go test yourself for the big boys.
It's like why would you want to win a show because you had a massive advantage? It's like going and clubbing baby seals. Like there's nothing awesome about that. And I'm firmly believe that if you've ever done any gear at any time, if you ever done a prop cycle, you're no longer natural. You should no longer be able to do a tested show. I don't care how many years that you've not been taking stuff, you still have an advantage.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that, man. I agree with that. And I know too many people who've tried it, right? They've done a big cycle of actually, some people I've heard of who've sold stuff before to other people, and then all of a sudden they're doing a natty show, the tested show, and then they're bragging about the trophy. And it's like, well, hang on, you've got a reputation for doing this.
Yeah.
Why are you bragging about winning because of that, right?
Well, they'll find loopholes. They'll find a new SARM that isn't on the banned list, and they'll take that. Then when it gets banned, they'll get off and they'll go, well, I never took it while it was on the ban list. And that's just ethically and morally, you're just a horrible person if you do that.
Yeah, 100%, man, 100%. And that's some valuable points there at the end. Like, these drugs need to be like the last thing in. They're not a holy grail. They're not anything magic. They're just a little bit extra at the end. And it's only if you feel it's right for you. It should never be pushed on by a coach, and it should never be pushed on by a coach or an athlete if it is in a natural federation, of course.
Icing on the cake. That's all it is.
Yeah, 100%, mate, 100%. So, mate, this has been incredible. I'm not going to take any more of your time because I know you're incredibly busy with all the multiple ventures you got going on and all the ass you're kicking over the world. So thank you so much for coming on. I encourage the guys to go check you out on your personal page and the Muscle Nerd Health page. And yeah, get on those courses and level yourselves up, because Luke is one of the top guys in this industry. He coaches the top guys in the industry on how to be better coaches. So you got so much you can learn from him. So thank you so much for your time, Luke. I appreciate it, and best of luck with everything, buddy.
Robin, man. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks for listening to The O Show with your host, Oren McCory. If you liked this episode, then please subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening and share this on your social media. We'll see you on the next episode for more no-nonsense advice to help you supercharge your efforts in the gym, in the kitchen, and most importantly, in your head. See you then.